That wouldn't bring her enough suffering or him enough satisfaction. By killing Ella, he could inflict endless pain on Charity, not just the few minutes she would suffer if he murdered her. Here is a clip of the emotional 911 call.
For a few moments, for a few minutes after it happened, it almost seemed like it was a dream, like it hadn't just happened. Because I had left the room and everything, and I was just hyperventilating. And then I had walked back in, and I had looked, and I had seen Ella and what I did. And it hit me like a punch in the gut that, no, I really just did that. And I called 911 because I felt like I need to do something about this. Maybe they can do something. Maybe it's not too late.
Abilene 911.
Hello?
Abilene 911, go ahead.
I accidentally killed somebody.
You think you killed somebody?
No, I know I did. My sister.
Okay, where's your sister now?
She's in the bed.
Is she breathing?
No, I looked. I feel so messed up.
Okay, calm down, okay? I want you to stay on the phone with me, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's your sister's name?
Her name is Ella Bennett.
How old is Ella?
4.
She's 4 years old? How old are you?
13.
Is she bleeding anywhere?
Yeah, she's bleeding all over the bed. Because I stabbed her.
What did you stab her with?
A knife.
Okay, where'd you stab her?
Lots of places.
Okay, Paris, where's the knife?
It's on the bed, mister. I didn't mean to.
I know, Paris. Okay, I want you to stay calm for me, okay? Okay. Go ahead, count.
1, 2, 3, 4.
I did not try to perform CPR. I took the phone and I left the room. And I remember counting into the phone to make the operator think that I was doing CPR. I wasn't even in the room at that point.
He hadn't even tried to save her. Although Ella's body was found on the bedroom floor, not the bed where she was murdered, she was lying on her side. There was no blood on the floor. There had been no attempts at resuscitation. Paris was taken to custody following his 911 call, before his mother even got to see him again that night. Per Texas law, his case was heard in juvenile court, where he pleaded true, the equivalent to guilty. Charity says Paris's defense attorney had his sights set on getting him the lightest sentence he could, while the state sought out the harshest. Neither had any regard for why Paris killed Ella, or if and how he could be helped. He was sentenced to 40 years on October 15, 2007, the maximum he could receive as a juvenile. It was 5 days after his 14th birthday when he was remanded to the Texas Department of Juvenile Justice's Giddings State School in Giddings, Texas. Following his sentencing, Charity was told by an expert from the trial that she deserved to know her son was a sociopath. She didn't want to believe it. She spent a small fortune seeking additional opinions, trying to find any professional who would tell her that her son was not a sociopath. Eventually, though, she had the youth psychopath checklist administered to Paris at the age of 16. Charity's last consultation was with famed forensic psychiatrist Dr. Park Dietz, well known for testimony in the trials of the Unabomber, Jeffrey Dahmer, Andrea Yates, and John Hinckley Jr. He told her she should concentrate on changing her identity and relocating in anticipation of Paris's eventual parole. Paris and his mother's relationship can only be described as strained. Charity understandably grapples with supporting her son while simultaneously feeling as though this does a disservice to the memory of her daughter. Once she had received the preliminary autopsy results showing the ferocity of Paris's actions, Charity went to the detention center and confronted him. She told him that she didn't believe his original story and that she was pretty sure he killed his sister on purpose. Back when Charity had received the preliminary autopsy results showing the ferocity of Paris's actions, she went to the detention center and confronted him. She told him that she didn't believe his original story anymore, and that she was pretty sure he had killed his sister on purpose. He admitted it, calling everyone stupid who believed his previous story of perceived demonic possession and hallucinations. Paris and his grandmother Kyla's relationship seemed a bit easier following his incarceration, and in 2009, Paris even attempted to have Charity removed as his guardian and Kyla appointed in her place. The spat began when Kyla supplied Paris with reading materials he had requested, but that both Charity and the prison deemed unacceptable for a young person with his history and issues. Graphic comic books and novels depicting rape, violence against women, murder, and other violent scenes were sent to Paris by his grandmother at his request, she explained. Charity alerted prison officials that Kyla not be able to provide her son with reading materials, though she put no limits or restrictions on their interactions otherwise. The sexual component to his crime made her extremely hesitant he be supplied with materials depicting sex or sexual violence. Paris wrote Charity letters saying they weren't healthy for each other and that she needed to exit his life. Charity said it wasn't up to him to decide whether she stopped being his mom or not. Her mother didn't seem to understand that, and she didn't agree. But the proceedings were withdrawn once Charity proclaimed she would never speak to Paris again if his request to be emancipated from her was granted. Kyla called it another way for Charity to maintain control over Paris. Charity called it a way for her mother to have control over some small portion of her life. Paris completed the first 5 years of his sentence at the Giddings State School in Giddings, Texas. In September 2012, it was determined he would be transferred the following month when he turned 19. Charity didn't testify and instead read a victim impact statement championing for Paris to be sent to adult prison. Around this time, Charity gave birth to her third child, a son named Phoenix. Paris has written his little brother's shoeboxes full of letters since his birth in 2009, letters he asked his mother to save and give to him when he's 12 or 13. Charity allows the boys to speak and interact over the phone, though she makes it very clear that she's uncomfortable. She doesn't know what else to do, but remains certain the brothers will not meet. Charity does not hide behind the fact that Paris's prison bars give her a sense of safety, although she knows it's not forever. Paris describes himself before Ella's murder as existing in a world of pain. He says he spent so long living like that, he wanted others to feel it too. Charity pointed out that around the time Paris tried to stab her, 4 months before Ella's murder, she had relapsed on her sobriety. It was after her second split with Ella's father, Jonathan, when she moved back to Texas. Living with Kyla was stressful for everyone in the home, and while trying to get a concert promoting business going, she says she began to use cocaine, though not daily. But she knew it affected Paris, and he even admits that it did. But he is quick to point out now, as a 25-year-old man, that it would be, quote, reductive to blame his feelings and his sister's murder solely on his mother's relapse. Paris has many things to say and has given many interviews over the past few years, but regardless of what he says, his mother feels he's just going through the motions, saying the words but with no emotions behind them. Charity is unwavering regarding how she feels about her son. She loves him and she forgives him, but she's scared of him. She advocates for Paris through her work as a prison reform activist. She advocates for Ella through the foundation she created in her name. They are both still her children. Charity would like Paris to get an fMRI, or functional magnetic resonance image, on his brain. Psychopathy research indicates those with the disorder generally show reduced blood flow between the amygdala, where anxiety and fear are regulated, and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, where sympathy and guilt are stimulated. But Paris refuses to participate in any such medical procedure, Charity said in an interview, because he's afraid the results will keep him from being paroled. Paris has been resistant to professional therapy over the years, especially at the beginning of his incarceration. The 2 or so years of counseling he received after his crime were administered to an unwilling participant and were therefore unsuccessful. Paris states he was unable to truly face the darkest sides of his personality at that young age. Charity feels that her son shies away from psychiatric intervention because he knows the results would be shared with the court. He cannot chance his potential diagnosis keeping him from parole in 2027. As it stands now, Charity and Phoenix live in Georgia, next to her mother Kyla. Charity visits Paris in Texas every 6 weeks. By 2027, she'll need to decide if she'll go into hiding and leave one son behind to properly protect her other son. This year marks Paris Lee Bennett being incarcerated for half of his life. For many years, Paris once said, "There was just this hot, flaming ball of wrath in the pit of my stomach, and it was directed at my mother. One of the reasons why I chose to kill my sister and not someone else is because I knew that by doing that, I can hurt my mother in the worst possible way, because I had always known, as a child, that the most devastating thing to my mother would be the loss of one of her children, and I found a way to take away both her children in one fell swoop." When asked in 2019 if he knew what love felt like, Paris had a perplexing response.
I don't really know how to answer that question. And I'm not saying that to be difficult or stubborn, but it's not simple. So I can't just point at something and say, okay, that's love. I recognize it easily, and I feel that. We could sit here and talk all day about my feelings for my sister. A description of my feelings isn't something that I can give you in the brief time that we have together, because I loved her. I loved her with every fiber of my being. I'm one of the reasons why it's so hard for me to talk about how I felt at that time is because I'm completely estranged from who I was then, and now I can't comprehend how I could ever have thought that killing my sister would solve my problems. It's like we're here talking about a completely different person. It's like you're asking me to try to climb inside someone else's head and peer through his eyes and catalog his thoughts. And I realize we're talking about myself, but it doesn't feel like we are. I'm actually glad to have been sent to prison because I feel that being here has given me time to peer very deeply into the darkest corners of my mind. And I think that had I not come here, I would not be happy with the man that I would eventually grow into. I think that maybe I fall somewhere along a spectrum, and I will not argue with you and say that I was healthy, because I did do something that was heinous and brutal and inexplicable, yes.
He remains adamant that his crime did not have a sexual element to it. He admits he didn't even want to discuss this matter. He didn't want to be seen as a sexual deviant. Ella did not have any evidence of sexual assault or molestation. Paris said just a few months ago that he doesn't feel he's been damaged by prison, but instead describes prison as a stain he's uncertain can be removed.
I'm the sort of person who's done the sort of things that people tend to judge pretty quickly. And I'm aware that I can't change people's minds about me. But just because I'm incarcerated doesn't mean that I'm worthless. Doesn't mean that I don't deserve a second chance. The things that I did when I was 13 aren't indicative of the man who I am now. Just because I committed a murder when I was 13 doesn't mean I'm going to get out of here and commit more murders. In fact, I'm going to get out of here and prove you all wrong.
As always, thanks for listening. Stay tuned for a promo from the new podcast, Nap Time Nancy Drew. Thanks to everyone for your continued support, and special Patreon shout out to Gia in Springdale, Pennsylvania. Thanks for listening. Come back soon for